Lizzie?
Wonderful. Hello, everybody. I am so thrilled to be here. It is so exciting and so fun to see where everybody's from Manchester, England to Marietta, Georgia. I almost moved there. Long story, didn't work out. But I'm here from Salt Lake City, Utah, and my husband Spencer is here as well. He's just sitting right next to me. He's going to help out with the chat and letting us know what your questions are and things like that. So if I reference him, he's just right here, like 2 feet away.
Hi.
So I'm Lizzie from Stitch People. Lizzie Bean is my name. And we are just so excited to be working with DMC and Michaels to bring you this cross-stitching class. That's what I do. I don't know if it's primarily even, but it's definitely one of the primary things I do. I'm a bit of a jack of all trades, for those of you who don't know me. My capital D dream is actually to produce and direct and act in TV and film. That's like my #1 passion, but for those of you in the entertainment industry, it's a tricky road. So for I always joke that Stitch People is my day job, but boy, what a day job. I sure love what I do. I'm gonna quick just show you a little bit more about what I do. So I am the primary designer and creator of Stitch People, and our do-it-yourself Stitch People book is our primary offering. I know a lot of you are from our community, and hello if you're friends already. What I focus on as a cross-stitcher is cross-stitch family portraits. And just a little bit about how I got into it. Back in, oh gosh, 2011, 2012, I was finishing college and I was depressed out of my mind, to be honest with you. And just listless, wayward. I didn't know, I was about to graduate. Spencer and I had gotten married and I just didn't know what I wanted to do or where I wanted to be. And so I had learned cross-stitching from my grandma and my mom. I have this in my office. It's a pillow that my grandma stitched. And I learned how to do that from my grandma and my mom back when I was like 8 years old, something like this. And I would pick away at projects over the years, but I just sort of got out of it. And I wanted to get back into cross-stitching, but when I went to the store, all I could find were these huge, hundreds of colors, big old cross-stitch projects that would take me, I know myself, 10 years. I have a 5x7 cross-stitch of a lighthouse that I started in 1998, and it is still not done. So I knew if I picked up another one of these, it was not going to be good news. So long story short, this idea of the cross-stitch portrait came across my life, and I had seen it some designs in a magazine, and I liked the concept, but I didn't like the design. So I thought, oh, I could go home, make my own designs. And the whole idea was to create bite-sized, meaningful projects that you can do in a weekend that mean something to you. They mean something to the person that you're giving them to. I made some Christmas presents. I had friends and family really like them. Spencer said, hey, what if we tried selling these online? And so for a long time, I was making these portraits. I've probably made, we estimated the other day, probably upwards of 750 cross-stitch family portraits. And I am but one person, and I became overwhelmed, and we kept tabs on our social media and saw people wanted to learn how to do this themselves. And so I thought, I can teach you. I have a background in teaching. Spencer and I met teaching software classes at BYU. Well, we reconnected teaching software classes at university. And so I thought, great, I will teach you. And so I wrote this book, Do It Yourself Stitch People, where we have patterns for men, women, children, all sorts of instructions about how to put together your family portraits and, with accessories, hair and color recommendations, all this kind of stuff. And so for those of you who haven't seen what we do, we just do all these kinds of family portraits. And that is how cross-stitching kind of came back into my life. And that is how I came to be teaching this class today, is just by continuing to make more and more cross-stitch patterns to serve all of you and the wildly varying interests of all of the people in the world. Our do-it-yourself book has, men, women, children, cats and dogs, babies kind of patterns. And then, we have holiday patterns, then we have backgrounds for, the vacations you go on, and we have weddings, and we have, our offerings have just continued to develop based on feedback from a lot of you. And anyway, that's just a little bit about who I am, what I do, why I'm here, why you should listen to me about cross stitching. Let me switch back to my camera really quick here. I would love if you could put in the chat, tell me a little bit about your stitching level. I would love to know on a scale of like 0 to 10, what you would consider your cross stitching ability to be. 0 is like brand new. I've heard of it. I've seen it maybe, but I've never done it before in my life. 10 is like, psh, I'm a seasoned pro. I've been doing this since 1965 and I can stitch anything under the sun. So 0, you've never done it before. 10, you're a pro. Oh, I'm seeing a lot in the middle, some highs, some lows. Oh, I love this. We're all over. Oh, this, okay, so last weekend, this is me and my jack of all trades. I went to a dance workshop last weekend with a woman named Galen Hooks. She's a great choreographer. And I was skeptical because it was like an all levels thing. I was like, is it really all levels? And it was. And it was so heartwarming to be in an environment with professional dancers and also beginning dancers. I'm more on like the beginning to intermediate, but more beginning end because it's been some years. And I just love this environment where we can have seasoned pros help out the beginners as well. It was such an enriching environment for me when I was a beginner. So I just want all of you beginners in this class to know I was in your shoes just last weekend, different subject matter, but don't be afraid that there are people in the chat here who know a little bit more about stitching because they're going to be able to help answer questions in the chat as we go. The biggest reason I wanted to get your input as well, get your skill level, I guess, is I wanted to know how much time to spend on kind of the basics. So I'm going to switch back over to my stitching view and I'm just going to go over for the newbies. I'm just going to give you a quick mad dash catch up into everything you need to cross stitch. It's really quite simple. And that's what I love about cross stitching. Cross stitching looks so complicated. I think it does. I think it can anyway. And it's one of those things that like once you kind of crack the code, smooth sailing, I tell you what. So if you've downloaded, this is our syllabus for our first class today. So for those of you who may not know, this is the first of 4 classes. So if you haven't signed up for all the classes, definitely do. You can do that stitchpeople.com/week2. It's WEEK and the number 2. And I also want to say, because I know this class is being recorded, so while we haven't jumped into instruction yet, for those of you who are watching in the future, I'm watching the recorded class, hello. I sort of hope Michael J. Fox shows up right now. So for those of you who can't watch the whole thing, for those of you who are watching in the future, this class is being recorded. It's going to be posted online within 24 to 48 hours on Michael's YouTube channel, as well as michaels.com/classes. It'll be available there. And if you registered for the class, but you don't have this fancy little syllabus or our Sherlock Holmes pattern, you can go to stitchpeople.com/Michaels, MICHAELS, stitchpeople.com/Michaels. Go there right now if you can. You can download the pattern. You can download the syllabus with the supply list, and that's what I'm going to be going over today. So I just want to give you a heads up. If you're looking at these pages like, what the heck? I don't know what that is. Go to stitchpeople.com/Michaels. You can get both the pattern and the syllabus downloaded.
And the thread colors.
And the thread colors. That's right. Because on our syllabus, we have listed that you need the floss. And it's listed on our pattern as well, but it's on the page itself? Or is it just in the pattern?
I think it's just on the pattern.
Great. But all the colors are listed on the pattern. So that'll be very helpful for you as you get going. I also want to say that we would love to see your stitching as you go. I get so excited, especially with you newbies, you beginners. Please, take the plunge. Jump in today. Start cross-stitching, especially if it's your first time. We want to see it. So if you're posting any photos to social media, Facebook or Instagram, make sure to use hashtag #MakeItWithMichaels, all one word as hashtags go, #MakeItWithMichaels. Also, if you use the hashtag DMC, because they're the ones helping us out with all the products today, and hashtag Stitch People. That way, all 3 of us at Michaels, DMC, and Stitch People can see what you're up to. We would love to see your works in progress. So, quick review, classes are going to be recorded 24 to 48 hours, posted Michael's YouTube or michaels.com/classes. pattern and syllabus, stitchpeople.com/Michaels. And that also has our floss color list and material list. And all materials can be bought on Michaels as well, supplied by DMC. And if you post to social media, #MakeItWithMichaels, #StitchPeople, #DMC. And those are all the things I needed to catch you up on. Now we're going to jump into materials really quick to catch the newbies right up to speed. And maybe it'll be a review for oldies, for the oldies as well. I'm an oldie for people who've been stitching for a long time. So I have my basket of goodies. I'm just going to go over the materials really quick. So when you do cross stitch or embroidery of any kind, you need an embroidery hoop. You know what I'm going to do? Well, no, this camera view is fine. You need an embroidery hoop, and they usually look something like this. There's also embroidery stands or frames or Q snaps. There's a whole bunch of different mechanisms you can use to secure your work, but you're definitely going to want to work with a hoop.
Now someone has a question.
Oh!
Do you need a hoop?
Do you need a hoop?
Need. Someone says that they are a level 8 stitcher.
And they never, oh.
And they use a hoop.
I respect you. I do respect you, level 8 stitcher who doesn't use a hoop. I don't think you need one. And here's the thing, friends. You know what? I'm going to get real with you. Transition to my camera right here. I'm going to get real close to the camera. Here's something you got to know about me if we're going to be spending the next 4 weeks together. I'm basically self-taught. My mom and my grandma taught me the basics when I was a kid. But when I jumped back into it in college, I just sort of figured it out and did what worked for me. And I want to encourage you to do the same. We live, now I'm going to get philosophical. We live in a world, in a society where there's a right way to do things often. You've got to like check off all the things on the syllabus to get your A+. And if you don't do it just the right way, you don't get the grade. That's not me. And I don't think that should be hobbies or crafting in general. Hobbies and crafting exist to fuel your creativity and make you happy. So if you don't want to use the hoop when you stitch, don't you dare use a hoop when you stitch. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. That's my personal philosophy. And I'm just gonna lead with that foot so that when you all see some of the choices that I make that may not be traditional, especially for you pro stitchers, I guarantee some of you are way more skilled than me. I just like talking and I just like making. So here I am. But you're going to probably see some of the things I do and go, oh, that's interesting. Yes, it is. And you can ignore it if you hate it, or if you love it, do it. Or if you want to do it a different way, do it your way. One of the things I believe in the most with crafting of any kind and creativity of any kind is don't let little things hold you back. So if you don't have a hoop or if you don't like a hoop, don't use one. Just jump in, just start stitching. That's the point. So I love that question. And I love that Pandora's box of explanation that it just opened up. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, we've actually got a hand raised. So I'll go ahead and let Gemma unmute her.
I can hear you. This is so exciting.
Gemma, did you lower your hand?
Maybe.
I don't see her anymore. If you come back, we'll unmute you.
Hey, Spencer, normally I just have them put the questions in the chat, so I lowered her hand.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Good to know.
Okay. Well, if you find her question or find any other questions pertinent, just give me a little raise my hand. So I'm going to go back to my stitching view here for you. So most embroidery hoops are made of wood or bamboo. They look like this, and I'll go over how to use one. Again, you don't need one. I just find it stabilizes the fabric. It's a little bit more hefty. You have something to hold on to so that when you're working just with fabric, you want things to lay flat. So I find when I've not used a hoop, I'm kind of always holding my fabric like my own. I'm kind of my own frame, my own hoop. So I tend to use one. It's just how I learned. It's how I like it. But if you don't even worry about it. And I won't judge you. I'll applaud you. Next on our list is I just put everything that a beginner might need to get going. So DMC has the coolest products, you guys. You can use a magnetic, they have this magnetic needle case. I have another little, I think this was a DMC. I got it a few years ago, but you can get needle cases of many different kinds. This one's available through Michaels. I just love it because it just keeps everything. I lose needles all the time. They're in the floor, they're in my chairs, they're everywhere. So it just is a really great way. And then when you're done with your project, you've just got a needle lying around. If it's magnetic, you can just pick it right up. I just want to give you some tips before we jump in as to products you can use that can really help you. We also need AIDA fabric. Some people say AIDA, like the opera or the Elton John musical. or you can say AIDA. I say AIDA for the opera, the musical, but AIDA for the fabric. AIDA is a specific type of fabric that's used for cross-stitching. It is an even weave fabric, meaning very technically speaking, the warp and weft threads, is that, yeah, well, I think that's what they're called. The up-down threads and the left-right threads are of an even number. They have the same number of threads, and they just weave evenly and create a square kind of grid-like pattern that is perfect for cross-stitching. And we will get into that a little bit later. Common sizes are size 11, 14, 18, 24, I'm sorry, 28. These are kind of the common sizes. And what that number means, that is important. So when you're deciding what number fabric to buy, 14 count means there are 14 squares of fabric. If you look closely on the fabric, you can see, well, I'll show you this fabric. You can see there are squares in the weave of the fabric, and that works perfectly for cross stitching. If you have a size 14 fabric, that means there's 14 squares per inch. So if you get a size 11 fabric, that means there's 11 squares per inch. That means it's going to be a little bit bigger because you can fit more stitches or squares per inch. Or I'm sorry, fewer per inch means they're a bigger stitch. So a size 11, you've only have 11 stitches per inch instead of 14, you're squishing more per inch. 18, you're squishing even more in per inch. And then a 28, you could do 28 teeny tiny itty bitty little stitches per inch, or you could make them double size, and then it's kind of the same scale as a 14 count, because 14 times 2 is 28. I hope this makes sense. So when you look at the count, just know that that's how many squares or stitches per inch fit in an inch. So AIDA fabric is what we use to cross stitch. Next, we already talked about the hoop. Oh, I skimmed over needles. I showed you the needle organizer. There are a lot of different types of needles you can use for embroidery and cross stitching. And honestly, it's a vast terrain of subject matter that I won't get into just because we don't have the time. I will just tell you my personal preference is to use size 5 embroidery needles, even if I'm cross stitching. You can use crewel needles or tapestry needles. Some are pointed, some are blunted. Cross stitchers sometimes use a blunted edge because the AIDA fabric has holes in the fabric that you use to stitch through. So technically you don't need that point to kind of poke through the fabric because there's an existing hole. However, like I told you, go outside the bounds of cross stitching sometimes, and I find the point on a needle to be very useful. So I do use a pointed embroidery needle, and I find that with size 14 AIDA fabric, a size 5 embroidery needle works great. And I can keep it in my cool little magnetic case in my cool little organizer, which I will also get to. What we need for embroidery and cross stitching next is embroidery floss. And I have all of my colors here for our pattern today. This is what embroidery floss looks like when you buy it from, say, Michael's. This is called a skein of floss, S-K-I before E except after C. S-K-I-E-N, skein. Just like with yarn, you're crafters, you know. It comes in a skein like this. It'll last you forever. And what I like, there's plenty of ways to organize floss. My preferred method is to use bobbins. You can get cardboard bobbins, DMC makes, or you can get plastic bobbins. And this is what they look like. And there's a hole at the top that you can use. You can use metal rings for your bobbins and keep them almost like little keys. That would be fun to like hang them on your side, like walk around. But I tend to use, I like to put mine in a little bobbin box. This one's way cuter because it's like the rainbow. This is what I like to do. So what I'll do is I'll take my skein of floss and I'll take a fresh bobbin like this, and I will just take these off and wind it. It's a fun activity to do while you're watching a movie or something like that, listening to an audiobook, and you just wind until you get it all on there. I'll write the number as well. DMC also offers stickers that you can easily just stick the number on if you're hyper organized and want things to be meticulously labeled. But this is my preferred method because then I can line it all up in colors like this, and I can just look for the color that I need as I need it. Most bobbin boxes also have a little, like a bigger area where you can keep, this is a little bobbin winder. DMC makes these. You can keep, you know, extras in here. This is my little trash bin. So you can organize your bobbin holder, bobbin box, however you'd like. This is what it looks like when you get it from Michael's. I really like it. Fish tackle boxes also work, but I just use a regular bobbin box, you know, from Michael's DMC. Let's see. And then last but not least, we have embroidery scissors. DMC makes great embroidery scissors. They're gold and silver and they look super fancy and they make me feel like a 19th century embroidery goddess. So I like to use these. There's also clippers that I'll use sometimes that look like this. Come on. There they are. Sometimes I'll use clippers. It's just whatever I have on hand. These I just got off Amazon, but I really do prefer these. They're sharp, they're elegant, they're small, they fit in my bobbin box. So you can get those at Michael's as well. So that's a basic rundown. That's it. That's it for supplies. And like I said, I went overboard on what you might need for beginners so that you could like get totally set up and be organized from the get-go. Like we mentioned, you don't need a hoop. You don't need a bobbin box. You don't need bobbins even if you just want to keep everything in skeins. It's up to you. So I just gave you what my basics are, a little brief overview of what all those materials are for and what they'll do for you. But without further ado, let's get into cross-stitching. Spence, do we have any pressing questions?
We've had this question a couple of times.
Ooh.
What's the difference between cross-stitch and embroidery?
That's an excellent question and a really good one to lead with in this cross-stitching and embroidery basics class, isn't it? So cross-stitching is technically, I will put this on my face so you're easier. I'm like making faces at the camera and I'm like this big in the screen. Cross-stitching is technically a type of embroidery stitch. So embroidery is the, I don't know what the Webster's Dictionary version or would be, but to me the way I'll summarize it is that embroidery is using a needle and thread essentially, or floss, to create thread art on fabric. That's what embroidery is. It's making art on fabric with some sort of fiber like an embroidery floss. There, under the umbrella of embroidery, there are many different types of stitches. If any of you are sewers and know how to do a running stitch, that's a type of stitch you can use in embroidery. Straight stitches, back stitching, anyone who does any kind of quilting or sewing, you already know a lot of really great basic stitches that you absolutely can integrate into embroidery. One of the types of stitches you can use in embroidery is a cross stitch. And a cross stitch is, this is a great intro into our how-to, a cross stitch is essentially just an X shape, just the letter X. It's a under diagonal and an over diagonal. Well, I guess I did that wrong. Under diagonal and an over diagonal. And it utilizes the holes of the AIDA fabric that you can see here. There we go. It utilizes the holes of the AIDA fabric as the corner points, boom, 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 of your X shape. And that's why AIDA fabric is so useful for cross stitching because the holes in the fabric really do give you those corner points for the X's. So the cross stitch is a type of embroidery stitch you can use in embroidery as a whole, or if you just repeat the cross stitches and focus on cross stitching, you enter the world of just cross stitching. And there are a couple different ways of cross stitching that you can find at that are traditional that you would find at craft stores or whatnot. There's what's called counted cross stitch, and then there's, I guess it's just printed cross stitch. Sometimes you'll find kits, sometimes you'll find kits where a pattern is like stamped onto fabric or printed onto fabric and you just trace it. And a lot of times it'll just be X's that you trace over. Or you can do counted cross stitch. And counted cross stitch patterns are usually on a grid, there's symbols, there's colors, and we'll talk about that right now. How about? I hope that answers the question of embroidery versus cross stitch. Basically, cross stitching will usually utilize often straight lines. So you've got some running stitches or back stitches or straight stitches, and it's still considered cross stitching. It's kind of part of the cross-stitching craft in general. You might get a few French knots in a cross-stitch pattern. You might get a few real basic embroidery stitches, and that's why we kind of wanted to loop these together. But we're also starting to see a trend in crafting embroidery cross-stitch at large, where it's kind of a free-for-all, and I love it because, reference what I said a few minutes ago, I just love doing things your way. Make it work for you, folks. But there's a movement, I guess, a shift towards cross-stitching and embroidery really overlapping, where people are bringing a lot of embroidery elements into cross-stitch patterns, or people will do a big section of cross-stitching on a linen embroidery piece that they're doing. I'm loving it, and that's why we're going to do a little bit of both today. So I'm going to pop on over to my stitching screen here, and I've pre-printed my Sherlock Holmes pattern. This is a pattern I designed in the style of Stitch People. As you can see, it's like our cute little people patterns under here. We've turned into beloved literary characters for you. So we've got our Sherlock Holmes and our John Watson at 221B Baker Street. We've got a cute door with some stairs, some little plants, lanterns, the window, and like a nice little archway. Super cute. So at least I think so. It's like, of course, whatever. Anyway, so I always feel weird talking about my own stuff. What I've done is I've printed out my pattern, and I've made a few markings on it ahead of time just so that I can reference it for you all as I'm teaching you about it. So I tend to make, one of the things about Stitch People is because it's our primary offering is do-it-yourself Stitch People. Because people are making family portraits or portraits of themselves, portraits of their loved ones, every pattern is going to be totally unique, totally personalized, totally customized to you, members of your family and friends that you're stitching. So I tend to keep my patterns on the more basic side to allow your imagination to flourish. Rarely do I specify colors, because I often will leave that up to you to do, because I want you to feel creative. We've specified colors here that you can follow along, or ignore it if you want to. I don't care. I'm not going to, actually, I do hope I see your finished product. I was just going to say, I'm not going to see it, but please post it online, especially if you change the colors, because I just love creativity. So feel free to throw my colors out the window if you want, but we've listed what colors I used in the photo example and what I'll be using in this class. Other more traditional cross-stitch patterns, the legend will have like, each color will have a symbol that represents it. It could be an and sign, it could be a letter, it could be a number. And down here, you'll also see the number or letter that's associated with the color. Traditional cross-stitch patterns can look a little more complex. But what I like to do before I get going is orient myself to the pattern when I'm doing counted cross stitch. What that means is it's good to identify a center point and kind of your edges, your edge points, your boundaries for the top, bottom, left, and right sides. Now I've done that here a little bit, and I've highlighted some guides for myself, but I'll show you what I did. So I'm just scanning this pattern, and I can see that this arch up here at the top is my top boundary right along here. So that's what these this highlight mark is. On this side, I've got, this is my boundary. This little half ear situation, I didn't count that. That's just a personal thing because it's like a half stitch. So I have my boundary along the right. I have my boundary along the left. And down here, I have the stairs that come along to the bottom here. So I just sort of marked that with highlighter marks around the edges so that I'm not writing directly on my pattern in a way that will confuse me, but I still have guides that I can follow around the edges. You don't have to do this, especially you advanced stitchers. Ignore me, you're good. But especially for beginners, I find it's really helpful to just orient yourself. So I have this right and left kind of margin mark, and then I counted left to right. I have 29 squares. So my pattern is 29 wide, or 30 if I'm counting that little half ear. And then I counted top to bottom as well, and I have 39. So then I just made hash marks at the 10 marks. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, boop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, boop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And that's just for me to help me count faster. So I can go 10, 20, 30 when I'm starting to stitch. I then found my center point my vertical and horizontal center point, it actually comes out to right in the middle of the knocker of the door. And I put a little dot with my blue highlighter there just for my own eye, but that's just happened to be how this pattern worked out. And I think it's pretty cool that is our center point. And that's actually where we're going to start stitching, because we got to start somewhere. But that is something when you're doing counted cross stitch, it is up to you where you start. And some people find that daunting, but again, I say jump in, let your creativity run wild, give yourself permission to be the artist and creator that you are. And you know you are. Like, don't fight me on that. You know you are. So you get to choose. You get to choose what color you want to start with. You get to choose where you want to start. Some people like to start at the bottom and work their way up. Some people like to start in a corner and kind of work their way up diagonally. Some people like to look it over and imagine what they think will be the hardest thing to tackle, start with that, or the biggest thing, get the big stuff out of the way. It's really up to you. For me, I'm looking at this pattern and I like to think in layers. So I can see that the plant here, which we're going to get to on the final day, is in front of the door. So I know I need to stitch the door before I stitch the plant, because the plant has to kind of go on top of the door, in front of, if you will. Same thing with the little, the busts of John and Sherlock. I can see the leaves come over them just ever so slightly. So I'm going to want them to be done before I put the plants in. I can also see that there are some gold details on the door, and there's, now in my print, it's a little easier to see in the digital pattern. I've printed it off, but I have these door details in gray here as well. So I've got a black door with gray door details, just linear, and gold stitched, cross-stitched door details. So I think what I'm going to do is I could either start with black or gold, but I know for sure that the gray needs to go on top of the black, just as I'm looking at this. So I'm going to start with the gold today, just because that's our center point, and that'll give us a good starting point to go from. And then we'll do the fill in the black stitches of the door around the gold knocker and kind of work our way from there. Same thing with the lettering on 221B up here at the top. That's obviously got to sit on top of the blue window background. So we're going to stitch the blue window background and then do the lettering on top. So this is the kind of planning that I mean. You can get as detailed as you'd like with creating guides for yourself or highlighting elements, but it's also looking ahead, planning ahead, getting a sense for the elements. We've got 2 lanterns, 2 people, door details, stairs, window, archway, plants. Okay, I know what I'm about. I know what I'm going to be doing. You can kind of match colors to what's going on as well. Get oriented. It's worth the minute that it takes. Now, then comes the fun part of transferring it to your fabric. And some people get overwhelmed with counted cross stitch for this reason, because you'll probably start just with a blank piece of fabric. And somehow you got to get this onto your fabric. And that can be kind of daunting. Fear not, I'll take care of you. I've already given you some clues and some keys and some tools to set you on your way. So we have a center point in our pattern. So let's make a center point on our fabric. Oh, I'm skipping a step. How much fabric do we use? I nailed it. I was going to talk about this and I was like, oh, I should get a calculator so I can show it on. Anyway, I'll just use my brain calculator. It's very slow and ineffective. But one of the reasons that I like to count out a pattern, sometimes patterns will have the dimensions for you. Like it might say up here, you know, a width and show you and a height and show you, it might be on the pattern somewhere. So definitely look at whatever pattern you're using. I did not write it on mine. It's not printed on this one, but in the future, when you buy patterns, sometimes people have done the counting for you and will tell you the finished dimensions of your pattern. Now I've counted them out, 29 and 39. Just for the math, I'm going to say 30 and 40 because that's way easier to talk about. So I'm going to call the width 30 and I'm going to call the height 40. Now, we have our center point defined. If I have a pattern that's 30 squares or stitches wide, that means there's going to be 15 stitches to the right and left of my center point. Same thing with my height. My height is 40 squares. I've just counted it from my pattern. 40 squares are stitches in height. So that means there's going to be 20 squares above and 20 squares below my center point. So now what I can also think about is the size of AIDA fabric that I'm using. Now I really like size 14 AIDA fabric. It's pretty standard. Remember what I told you at the beginning, the count of the AIDA fabric refers to the number of stitches per inch of fabric. So if I'm using a size 14 fabric and my pattern is going to be 40 squares in height, that's roughly 3 to 4 inches total, because 40 squares of pattern divided by 14 squares per inch of AIDA fabric is 2.85. 2.85 exactly. So that's about how many inches in height it's going to be. About 3 inches in height. Same thing left to right. My width is 30 squares. So with my size 14 AIDA fabric, which is almost 15, that's about 2 inches, right? So we've got about a 2-inch by 3-inch total project. Now, when you're cutting your fabric, I always recommend, and I think this is generally recommended in the cross stitch world, but I generally recommend 2 inches of extra on all sides. So if we have a 2-inch wide by 3-inch high pattern that we're stitching, then we're going to want a 6-inch wide by 7-inch piece of fabric. And that just gives us plenty around the edges. It gives us enough to secure in our hoop that if we get grime on our hands and we're touching our fabric by accident and it gets gritty and gross looking, doesn't matter because it's on the outer edge and that's 2 inches away from my final product anyway. So this is another reason it's important to count your pattern ahead of time. Once you know how many stitches or squares in width and height you have for your finished product, you can then divide that by the size of your AIDA fabric, and that'll tell you how much AIDA fabric your final portrait or project is going to be. I tend to say portrait because I live in portrait land with the Stitch People portraits, but not every cross stitch project you work on will be a portrait. So forgive me for if I am confusing in that lingo, but that's why you count ahead, you figure out what your finished project is going to be and estimate your fabric needs accordingly, and then add 2 inches above, below, and side to side. Oh, hey, look, Spencer gave me this to use. Ta-da. So what I've already done is, and I need to scooch my body a little closer to my desk. So you're welcome for this view up close and personal. So before we got started, like I mentioned, I went through my pattern with my highlighter and marked my center point and my edge points. I also had a piece of fabric ready that I cut ahead of time. And the way to find a center point of your fabric, once you've measured accordingly, is you fold it in half, both widthwise and lengthwise. This is just a square piece, but you fold it in half, you give it a little squeeze. AIDA can be a little stiff, and you can wash it beforehand to soften it up if you want. I never do, because that's a barrier to entry for me that I am unwilling to do. Just, it keeps me from crafting, and I'd rather just cross stitch with stiff fabric than never cross stitch because I keep forgetting to throw my fabric in the washer. But you absolutely can. I've just never done it, so I don't have any recommendations. For those of you who do pre-wash your AIDA fabric, let us know in the comments in the chat if you have any recommendations for pre-washing your fabric. I know it's a thing people do. It's not something I do. It's optional. So that's the reason I brought that up, is you can see this fabric's a little bit on the stiff side, but I like to fold it widthwise and lengthwise. And then I've just got a basic mechanical pencil and I've lightly marked the center point. Now, there are a lot of you in the chat who probably really hate me right now because I just use a regular mechanical pencil. I know, I'm sorry, my grandmother's probably rolling in her grave about this. For me, you can use a water-soluble sewing pencil. You can use a heat-soluble pencil or pen. I know there's a lot of different soluble options, and those would probably be a slightly more responsible choice for a crafter. You can get them on michaels.com. You can get, DMC has them as a product. This is a very common product. I have mine somewhere. I have bins of craft things. But again, the use of a mechanical pencil lightly on the back, I draw very lightly. I've never had a problem with bleeding or any like graphite getting on my floss or anything like that. And to me, I've got a lot more of these laying around than I do the water soluble pencils. So it's easier for me to just grab a mechanical pencil, make a few little tick marks on the back of my fabric and jump into stitching. And to me, that's worth it because I am who I am. And if I'm not jumping in, it's not going to happen at all. So permission to use what you have on hand. I would say maybe don't use the Sharpie. Like don't use like a permanent marker. That would be a bad idea. Or any marker. And shy away from pens because those also are inky and can go haywire. But I've never had a problem with just lightly using a basic graphite pencil. I'm so sorry, Grandma. Continuing on. So I fold my fabric, I mark my center point, and then I counted up 20 squares, down 20 squares, left and right 15 squares, because that's about the measurements that I have here on my pattern. And now
So what's the size of this fabric here?
Oh, the size of this fabric total is about 7 inches, just over 7 inches, about 7¼ by about 7¼ 7½. Not a perfect square. I keep a bunch of chunks of AIDA fabric pre-cut. So I just grabbed one that was ready to go because I knew it would be big enough. But because, once again, because our final portrait is going to be about 3 inches high by about 2 inches wide, then we've got minimum 2 inches above, 2 inches below, and at least, I mean, now we've got 3 inches side to side of extra fabric as buffer. AIDA fabric, because of the weave, it can, see already, it can fray. So if you don't have a lot of extra on the edges, your fraying can get awfully close to your finished portrait, and you don't want that. So it's good to just leave some extra. That's what I like to do. So I mark my center point, I've marked my edge points, and now I'm gonna put this into my hoop. And this is also gonna drive some of you crazy, but I'll tell you there's method to my madness. Traditionally, embroidery hoops are used like so. You put the front of your fabric into the big hoop, you lay the little hoop under, put your fabric, you make a fabric sandwich, a little Sammy. Oh, a sandwich sounds so good right now. And then you screw the top together. It brings the tension of the hoop closed, and you can pull your fabric tight, and you've got this great looking, ready to go embroidery cross stitch situation happening. This is the traditional way to do it. I don't do it that way. I like to use it backwards or upside down, some might say, where I like to put the back side of my fabric facing out, and I will tell you why. I will justify this, and this is a hill I will die on, or so help me. Let me center this just so it's nice and aesthetically pleasing for all.
What size is this hoop you've got?
This is, I believe, this is a 6-inch hoop. And I just want to do it because it's was a little bit smaller to handle for my filming purposes. But you can use a 6-inch, hoops come in all sizes, 5, 6, 7, 8 inches. Whatever's comfortable for you is what you should prioritize, because you can always take your project out of a hoop and frame it in a smaller sized hoop if you want to frame it in a hoop, or put it in just a traditional frame, whatever you'd like. So I'm just pulling the edges of my fabric around this hoop to get it nice and tight and lay it nice and flat. And as you can see, the back side is on what is traditionally the front side of my embroidery hoop. And the reason I do this, once again, this has to do with me and my personality and lowering the barriers of entry to cross-stitching and crafting in general. I am a person, I don't know why, but I tend to touch my face a lot, like scratch it and whatever. When I've got makeup on my face and I touch my face, that makeup gets on my fingers. Then when I touch my embroidery hoop, that makeup gets on my fabric. It's not a great situation. I do wash my hands before I start cross-stitching often. And that's a good tip, just like a pro tip, is to wash your hands before you start cross-stitching, because you're gonna be handling needles, threads, floss, touching your fabric, all sorts of touchy-touchy going on. And anything like Dorito dust or Cheeto dust or any kind of delicious snack dust or dirt from your garden or fur from your dog, whatever that's on your hands is gonna get onto your fabric. Guaranteed all of that stuff is on my hands and will get onto my fabric because I'm who I am. So I like to put my, my fabric in upside down as opposed to the traditional way embroidery hoops are usually used, because when I look at the front of my, what will be the front of my portrait, which is now recessed, look at where my thumbs are. They're on the outer edges. This is why we like to have slack on our fabric, but the majority of my fingies on the back of my fabric, it protects, since the front of my fabric where the finished product essentially will show, since it's recessed, my dirty fingers don't get all over it because I've got this little lip around the edge. I'm I'm not tempted to have any of my fingers on the work itself, muddying up my fabric, my nice clean fabric, and all of my messy hands can be on the back side of my fabric. So that's just a little Lizzie hack for you. Take it or leave it. It's up to you. So now we have talked about what information you want to glean from your pattern. You want to get a sense of all the elements, a sense of the colors. If there's symbols, check out the symbols and colors that match. You can map out a grid to help yourself count. Then I like to just put some markings on the back of my fabric. You don't even have to do that. Some people just like to mark a center point and go. And some people, I don't do this, but I will give you a tip. Some beginners get confused looking at their pattern and what they've done already. Feel free to use a highlighter or whatnot. And as you go, like mark off sections, if that makes sense. You can highlight as you go or mark as you go, black it out as you go. That's an option if you get easily confused or you get lost and you're not sure what you want to do. Before I move on to my next little portion, do we have any pressing questions or?
No, I think most questions are getting answered by other people in the chat.
Cynthia said it's a genius hoop hack. And Leslie said she loves it. Thanks, guys. I stumbled onto it by accident. It is kind of genius, though. It works for me. Because I touch my face a lot. It's a problem. It's a problem. So now, oh no. Jonas says I bought a 7-inch. The fabric cut is too small to fit in 7. Oh, I'm so sorry. If my fabric is a 7-inch by 7-inch square, so on a 7-inch hoop, I guess my 6-inch hoop is a little on the smaller size. I might have shown 7 based on availability on the website, but that also might not be. I could just be crazy. I apologize if it doesn't fit exactly. As you're putting the hoop together, just pull the edges as best you can to tighten it as you go. Or if you have excess fabric, maybe cut, an 8 by 8 inch square or whatever. Just give yourself a little more slack. I apologize about that. So our center point is this gold knocker on the door, and that's where I'm going to start today stitching with you, just because it's a nice, easy focal point. And if you notice, we've got a number of squares that are fully gold in there. And we also have some diagonal gold squares in there to make up that knocker shape. What are we gonna do? I'll show you. And we will get the basics of cross stitching down here in our next 12 minutes. This is timing out perfectly. So if we look at the gold details down here, I believe we've got DMC 729 is medium old gold for the door details. So that is this color here. And I'm going to talk to you for a second about floss. So I'm actually going to transition to my front facing camera because I think I'll have a better view. Maybe I won't. Just kidding. Hi, good to see you. Back to stitching. So when you've got a skein of floss like this, you've got your little tail hanging out. Often, especially with new stitchers, you're like, how much floss do I need? For a little pattern like this, first of all, a skein is going to last you a really long time. You can see, I think the skeins show how much is on here somewhere.
Oh, like the total length?
Yeah. I should know that. I feel like I should know that. I don't see it on here, but it's like 3 yards or something. It's deceptively, like, it's a lot. And the reason
8.7 yards.
Oh, 8, just fully 8, almost 9 yards, 8.7 yards of floss. It's a lot. So something else you should know about embroidery floss, and this gets a little bit tricky, but this is where the internet helps us, or our friends who are avid stitchers above us. Common floss questions have to do with how many threads of floss to use and what length of floss to use at a time. Now, as you learn to stitch and you get more and more comfortable with it, swapping colors out, switching from gold to black to gray, whatever you need to do, becomes easier and easier, and I'll show you how to do that. So working with shorter lengths is not going to become as much of a problem because you're going to be a total pro at swapping out colors. So I have a general tip, and I will switch to my camera for this so that you can see. When you're cutting a length of floss to work with, a general rule of thumb is that a length from your, a thumb and forefinger, where you're holding the tip of the floss down to your elbow or up to your shoulder those are going to be comfortable lengths to work with. Anything more than that, you're opening yourself up to the floss kind of getting twisty and knotty, or it's getting so long that as you're stitching, you're like, whoop, and you have to go back in and like, whoop, and it just gets real intense. So I generally like to go from fingers to bicep-ish, and I find that to be a comfortable length to work with. So that is what I'm going to work with today using my fancy 19th century dream embroidery scissors to clip them with. Now I'm going to switch back to my stitching screen so that you can see each DMC's embroidery floss, which I love. The quality is excellent. And I just love DMC because I've always loved DMC. I'm not getting like paid to tell you this. I just really like DMC's offerings because the quality is excellent. They've been around since like 1746. They've got hundreds of colors to choose from. And that's why I say get creative with your patterns. If you want to swap colors, if you want to make Sherlock Holmes a redhead, do whatever you want. I say go for it. Because DMC has those as options, just tons and tons of great colors. And their beautiful silky floss is made up of 6 individual strands of thread that are kind of loosely twisted together to create the embroidery floss. So if you look really close, you can kind of pull these threads apart and you can see, and I will do this so that you can see it against the backdrop a little more clearly. You can see that I've got, there we go. And if it'll, there we go. So there's 4 strands pulling away quite nicely. You can see that there are 6 strands making up this embroidery floss. And this is where a lot of new stitchers, you get real excited and you're like, I got my pattern, I got my embroidery floss, I'm gonna start stitching. And you just load up your needle and you go. And then you've got a really, really chonky looking stitch, cross stitch work of art. And you're like, why does it look so chonky? This is why, I'm telling you why. You gotta split your threads apart. Depending on the size of AIDA fabric that you're using, you're gonna wanna use different numbers of threads. For size 14 AIDA fabric that we're using, I really like the look of 3 threads. Some people pare it down to 2 because they like it to look even more like minimalistic and sparse. Some people thicken it up to 4 because they like a thicker look. I think using 3 strands, 3 of the 6 strands in DMC's 6-strand embroidery floss, I think it's perfect for size 14 fabric. So what I'll do is I cut my length of floss and then I separate the strands. You can kind of, if you're gentle and slow and patient with it, which are 3 things that I generally am not, but I try to be with embroidery floss, you can split it quite easily. As you can see, it's just really pulling apart so seamlessly. If you get a knot, just work at it. Sometimes I'll stick the, because you're pulling apart 2 sides and you've got this little 3rd side that'll get twisted. Sometimes I'll stick that in my mouth and it acts as like tension to help me pull it apart. Or grab a friend if you've friend or husband or somebody. Then you thread your needle. And this is a little tricky. You've got 3 strands of floss. You've got to get into the eye of the needle. Sometimes if you've made a really clean cut of your floss, you can just pop them right in there. I generally will just kind of wet the ends of my fingers with my mouth and get the fibers stuck together just enough to thread my needle in like this. Now, this is another trick with embroidery versus sewing. To thread your needle, this is all you do. We don't knot it. We don't, you can, there are different methods of, for example, if you like the look of 2 or 4 threads, you could pull 2 threads out and then double it. And then you've got 4, if you understand what I mean. If you're following along with me and you're using 3 threads of floss, this is as far as I will thread it. I'll just leave a little tail that's like 1.5 inches. If you're a beginner, maybe pull that tail a little bit extra just so you have more slack to work with. But I generally will hold my tail at about 1.5 inches like this. And we don't use knots to start in cross stitch, generally speaking, because there's holes in the AIDA fabric, you'd have to make a really, really thick knot in your floss to prevent it from pulling through that hole in the fabric. It's meant to have holes that we use for the cross stitches themselves. So I'll show you what to do instead. So again, we're starting with this knocker in the door in the pattern. The knocker happens to be the center point here at our fabric. So here's my center point, and I'm going to put my needle through to the center. And here we go. So you bring your needle from back to front, starting at one of the corners of what will be the center point of this first square cross stitch. You make your first diagonal. So I started at the bottom, let's see, the bottom left corner. Because this is your center point, again, you might be going like, well, which hole do I use to start my diagonal? I don't know what to do. This is where counted cross stitch does leave creative choices in your hands. As long as you're consistent from the point that you begin moving forward, it doesn't super matter. We know that our center point is where that is on our fabric, and we know the center point of our pattern is the door knocker. So as long as our first stitch is right by that center point on our fabric, we can build our whole pattern out from this center point of our pattern. I hope that makes sense. Once you know where that one square cross stitch is, the whole rest of it comes into view. So I essentially started, I brought my floss up from the, oh, there we go. I'm so sorry, we're super zoomed in. I have very little wiggle room. So I brought my needle from back to front, and I have this little tail, and I'm gonna hold that with my finger, my left hand finger, while I flip my work over to the front, and I'm gonna create a diagonal. And because I started, in my mind, it's the bottom left corner of this stitch, I'm gonna make a diagonal to the top right corner. There we go, ta-da. Now I've gotta take my needle from back to front and make my second diagonal. But before I do, I'm gonna show you what to do with this tail that will pull through on the back if we're not careful. So as I pull through to create my first cross stitch, a loop is going to form on the back of my fabric, just by its own nature. Oh, and I caught some of my own floss. That's okay. What I want to do is feed the tail that I started with through the loop that's forming as a result of my completing this cross stitch, and it will hold my tail in place and prevent me from needing to make any knots.
What's that called? Loop start?
Casting on is what that's called. There is such a thing as a loop start. There's a thing called a way knot or a waist knot. And there you have it. We have created our first cross stitch, and that is going to be the center of the knocker of our door. Now, if you look at the pattern, we have 4 more cross stitches to complete, one up, below, and to the left and right. And that essentially immediately and exactly translates onto the fabric. So you just create X's, and you'll see in the AIDA fabric as you go, your cross stitches will start to share holes of the AIDA fabric. And I'm looking at my clock here, and I see that we've got 2 minutes, but I can bust this out in 2 minutes. Now, as you stitch, one thing to keep in mind, and this is a real pro tip, and if you get this in your head from the start, this will really, really help you as you stitch, is to make sure that each cross stitch is made up of 2 diagonals, kind of a left one and a right one. And you want to make sure that all of your under diagonals, because one of the diagonal has to cross over top the other to make the X. You want to make sure all of your under diagonals go the same direction and all your over diagonals go the same direction. That'll give your cross stitch art of any pattern you're doing a really consistent feel. So I'm just going to quick stitch these X's up. I realize we didn't get a ton of stitching today, but I wanted to get a lot of prep and explanation out of the way to get our newbies up to speed. And I'm just following the pattern and filling in, essentially, it's almost like coloring. It's like you've got this blank grid of AIDA fabric, you've got a grid with a pattern on it, and you just need to kind of color in the squares with embroidery floss to match what the pattern is. It's like a detached paint by number, but using embroidery floss. And there you have the first 5 full cross stitches of the knocker for the door. And the diagonals are exactly as they look. They're just half stitches. They're just diagonals. And we'll fill these in with black diagonals as well. That's my preferred method, is to do both colors that share the square. But I'm just going to go around, once again, following the pattern, filling in these diagonals to create this circular shape that represents the knocker on the door. Now, in my last minute, I just want to say, as you keep working on this pattern, I would love to see your progress. I really, really find a lot of joy in it. So if you would post your progress on social media, that would be so cool. Do hashtag Stitch People, hashtag DMC, and hashtag Make It With Michaels so that we can all see what you're up to and leave you a bunch of emojis. I love emojis. And make sure to sign up for our second class because we went through just materials and basics, but it is going to get to be so much more fun. We're going to finish this pattern together by the end of class. So next class, we're going to talk more about cross stitching and how to swap out colors. We're going to, in the third class, tackle how to do a lot of these detailing with Sherlock Holmes, the plaid, with the door straight detailing with the lettering up here. And then in our final class, we're going to talk about basic embroidery techniques for the ferns in the front here for the little smoke coming out of Sherlock Holmes' pipe. Those are going to be French knots. We're going to talk about, we're even going to do something special with John Watson's mustache there. We're going to make that look a little more realistic. And I'm going to give you some real hair technique tips for their hairstyles just to get a little fancy there. So please sign up stitchpeople.com/week2, just the number 2, W-E-E-K, the number 2. And to sign up for next week's class, sign up for all of them because I'd love to see you through on the rest of this project. I know you advanced stitchers were probably like, hello, this was so basic. Thank you for being here and for helping answer questions in the chat. We're going to get more advanced and more excited as we go. Now, I do want to say between now and next week, I don't know that we'll have time with just the next 3 hours to complete the whole cross stitch in real time. What I'm going to do is finish the black door. I'm going to finish that before our next class. I'll post about it to Instagram and whatnot, but I'm going to finish the black door. We can finish gold details together, but we're going to get into stitching the characters next week. So you know what? I'm even going to go ahead and say, let's finish the black and gold details of the door. See if you can figure that out, beginners. If not, that's okay. Feel free to get in touch with us too. Message us on Instagram. You can follow us at Stitch People or at Lizzie D Bean, L-I-Z-Z-Y-D Bean, like the food. Let us know if we can help you, but I'm going to finish the black and gold color of the door before next week's class so that we can jump into the characters and talk about color switching and little details, this, that, and the other. So without further ado, I shall say thank you for joining and give you a sweet farewell. I can't believe an hour just flew by. Thank you for joining us today. And Spence, am I missing anything? We covered all our bases. Thank you. And hopefully beginners, you've got a grasp on materials, how to get going, advanced. Looking forward to digging into some more advanced techniques with you over the next few weeks. And I'll look forward to seeing you a week from today, everybody. Thank you so, so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful week. And we'll see you same bad time, same bad place. Thank you.